Hello and welcome to We Never Met, the podcast where I have interesting strangers on every single week. Today I have Matthew Howard. Do you like Matt or Matthew?
Let's stick with Matt.
Okay, Matt. All right, I got Matt Howard from the Water Council. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Matthew is my my name when I'm in trouble. So
I'll remember that. I'll use that later on if I ever need to.
Let's stay out of trouble today. I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Good. Yeah, definitely. I'm really interested in sort of what you do at the Water Council and like your life before that as well. I think is really interesting. But for people that don't know, before we even get into any of this, what is the Water Council? Like, what do you guys do?
Yeah, great question. So the Water Council is a nonprofit that's headquartered in Milwaukee. And essentially, they have functioned as a water technology and solutions provider. And it's really about building an ecosystem that supports water technology development and water solutions provision. So we've got, I'd say about 200 plus members from the private sector, so companies making things like water meters and water quality monitoring equipment and things of that nature, to universities, Marquette, UWM, to nonprofits. So it's a pretty diverse kind of like ecosystem, if you will, of water technology solutions providers. And so we were started about probably 10 plus years ago, really with the goal of promoting Wisconsin-based water technology solutions nationally and even internationally. And probably over the past, I'd say 5 to 6 years, we've expanded into sort of the stewardship space. So how do companies actually manage water within their four walls? And we've certainly grown more in terms of a focus internationally. So we have a number of MOUs and agreements with other countries and cities internationally to share, knowledge and best practices on water technology issues.
Yeah, because I didn't really realize this. I'm from Milwaukee, and I didn't realize how much of a hub it was for like all these technologies and freshwater, like sciences and stuff like that. Even UWM has a college for it. So why is that? Why did it sort of concentrate into Milwaukee and Wisconsin, I guess, specifically?
Yeah, it's almost historical kind of circumstance, if you will. A lot of Milwaukee's early industries, so going back to European settlement and, shortly thereafter, a lot of those early industries like brewing, tanneries, other sort of food and beverage related activities all needed, supplies to fresh water. And so essentially a lot of the European immigrants came over here and had, all this water from Lake Michigan and the tributaries going into the lake. And so, they could use that to essentially supply those industries. So we have a history of very water intensive manufacturing in the region. And so, as those industries matured, they needed pipes and valves and meters, to measure their water use and to, measure water quality and quantity issues. And so as those industries grew, the technology to support it grew up next to those industries. And so it's a bit ironic because, maybe 15, 20 years ago, with consolidation in the brewing industry and a lot of the heavy manufacturing, like, tanning and whatnot, some of those industries, either moved out of the region or overseas, or, just the industry changed. And what was left were all these water technology providers. And so it's what we call almost a natural ecosystem of water technology here in the region. And then the universities, you mentioned UWM, so they've got the country's only graduate school of freshwater sciences, and Marquette's really developed a specialty in terms of water law and water policy. And so it's just interesting how, the technologies and those tech companies remain, like, Badger Meter and Rexnord and some others. And then how, the universities just started developing, expertise and sort of an academic focus on fresh water. And so it's become this, like I said, an ecosystem. We've actually been written up, the region, not just the Water Council, but the region has been written up a couple of times and sort of held out as a best practice nationally and internationally, from like the Harvard Business Review to Brookings Institution. So yeah, it's really interesting, and it's cool because it's a homegrown sort of success story. Yeah.
And was this something that you were interested, like, because I know you went to college for economics. So when you were in high school, did you sort of have a clear idea of where you went or where you wanted to go, or was this sort of something later on in your career that you found like you're really interested in sustainability and water and things like that?
I've always been interested in like, political science and history. Sure. And kind of, for lack of a better word, like systems thinking, like how does a system work? And I think I took an econ class in high school. I'm pretty certain I did, but I took a lot more sort of political science and history. And then when I went to college, I was fortunate enough to go to a school that had kind of an interesting combined major. It was economics, history, a language, and like political science. And that was all in one major. And so I didn't really kind of like specialize in economics until probably last year or so of college and then into graduate school. So, I mean, the short answer is no, I didn't always plan on an economics career. But in fact, when I think my first year at college, I was a math major. Oh, yeah. I don't know. I was sort of encouraged just to pick a major, and math is obviously, it's a good foundation for like if you go into engineering and certainly economics. But I dropped that like a bad habit after my first year.
Yeah, mathematics is tough. My brother actually, he went to school initially with a mathematics major in mind or whatever, and started taking the classes, and he's like, no, let's not do this. Yeah,
my kind of like my personal story in terms of my decision point to change majors. It must have been a Saturday in the spring, and I went to undergrad at Valparaiso University in Northern Indiana. So like spring was, always late. Yeah. And so it was one of those Saturdays where like spring had arrived, and everybody had spring fever, and I was stuck working on this calculus equation, and we would get like, 2 equations assigned to solve, over the weekend. Yeah, and I had spent like on this Saturday, like it was like 8 hours, like working on it. It was the volume of a light bulb, of a certain type of light bulb. And I got it wrong. And I was just kind of like, this is stupid. I'm done. When am I going to need this skill in the future? And everybody's outside having a good time. So I think I'm going to switch majors. So it probably wasn't the most informed decision, but actually it served me quite well because once you get higher up in econ, there's a lot of math. So I was well prepared.
Yeah, that's tough. Doing like one question for 8 hours is just tough on anybody's mind, I feel like.
Yeah.
It's rough. So when you graduated and then got your master's, were you, because you sort of talked about your interest in politics and stuff, was government something that you like really wanted to get into right away, or were there other things that you were interested in like post college and wanted to go to?
Yeah, so when I applied for graduate school, so I went right after I graduated from undergrad, and it came down basically to 2 schools, Notre Dame and then George Washington University in DC. And essentially, I chose DC just because of the access, to government and think tanks and all that stuff. And still, even at that point, I don't know that I had a particular goal or desire to work for government. But obviously, when, the school, for people who don't know where George Washington University is, it's like 3 blocks from the White House. It's right in the middle of Washington, D.C. And so there are a lot of opportunities for internships and whatnot. And my first semester, I got an internship. Actually, I was working for the European Union mission in D.C., just doing some research for them. And then like the following semester, I got hired for an internship with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, doing research for them as well, and just enjoyed the work. It was kind of it was a different era when people still had respect for government institutions and people who are working in government. I worked with a lot of smart, dedicated people over my career, and it just it drives me nuts to hear people sort of disparage or downplay people who work in government at any level, because they're working on behalf of citizens, trying to make this place a better place to live. So
yeah. Is that what sort of kept you going and made you want to do it? Is that sort of mantra? Is that like helping, even if it's, not the president or a senator, helping the country be better in some sort of way?
I mean, there's part of that there. I mean, the other part of it was really fun. I mean, you're in the middle of, the power structure of the U.S. and globally, and you were rubbing shoulders with decision makers and politicians and whatnot, and yeah, I mean, it was. I think it was just as exciting, participating in that process as it was knowing that you're hopefully having or contributing to some positive outcomes in the country. But yeah, I mean, I probably had just as much fun as it was, sort of a dedication to like a mission or something like that.
Yeah, which is interesting because you do hear a lot of people that work in government that don't have fun. So,
Yeah.
What was fun for it about you? Like, what did you enjoy so much about the process and working in government?
I guess going back to what I said about systems thinking, it's interesting. It was interesting to see how policy is made and decisions are made that affect everybody, in the country. And I was working primarily, or at least at the beginning of my career, on sort of evaluating like the impacts of international trade on our economy, and sort of providing advice to different people about, maybe we should, follow this path versus that path. Or if we do this thing, it's really going to have a bad impact on, prices in the US or whatever.
Sure.
And so it's just sort of, it's interesting to write a briefing memo, for a decision maker, for a politician or somebody who's got like 5 minutes literally to digest the issue and then make a decision that impacts billions of dollars.
Yeah.
And it actually gave me a lot of respect for, some of the, people really high up in terms of management in the government, no matter what political party or, kind of where they're at. I mean, there's people making some pretty significant decisions on a day in and day out basis. And, they've only got, 15, 20 minutes per issue to sort of decide on these things. So the other thing it did is it really made me focus on like giving the person the most pertinent and concise information so that they could move forward. That has its drawbacks, which is on some of these really complicated issues, you got to spend more than 15 minutes making a decision on it. So the other aspect to this was, trying to ensure that you were getting as much information as possible, to the people that were making a decision, because a lot of these issues are very nuanced. So that was one aspect. That's like at the job aspect, going to different meetings at different agencies, at Treasury, State Department, and different places like that. I lived my first year of graduate school. So like when I was doing all these internships, I lived on campus. So, walking past, the White House or the State Department, on the way to work or class. I mean, that's just kind of cool being down, in that area. And this is all, again, for people who can't see me right now on the podcast, is 20 plus years ago. So again, a little bit kind of a different time. And DC was a different city back then because that was pre 9/11.
Sure.
And it was still, it wasn't the most desirable city to live in. It still had a lot of kind of legacy crime issues, and even downtown was a little bit sketchy when I moved there. And then it was kind of after 9/11 that it went through this like boom, tech boom, security boom. And that's when it really became this magnet for young people. But by the time my wife and I left in 2010, I would say, house prices were like doubling like every 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just totally unaffordable. It was becoming really crowded, and we were both from the Midwest. So it was like, it's time to move back.
It's time to get out of here.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
What led you to sort of a more sustainability? Because when you enter government, and even working at the different places that you did, you could go, as you said, there's so many nuanced things and different issues to go towards. What led you towards like sustainability and things like that?
Yeah. So when I was in, kind of, I guess, growing up, and, we were a very outdoorsy family, hiking, hunting, fishing, camping, spent a lot of time just outside, and, just kind of generally having an appreciation, for the outdoors and an ethic for conservation. My parents weren't, particularly bent towards environmentalism or anything like that, but always kind of a personal ethic of responsibility and,
Sure.
waste not, want not, and enjoying the outdoors and, things of that nature. So I always, had that base, but there was never a connection between that and then like a job.
Sure.
And then when I was in college and even in graduate school, sustainability wasn't a subject matter or a topic in the US. I think the first actual graduate program in sustainability, it was at Arizona State University. And I think it was like 2003 or 4 or 5.
That's crazy. It seems so late to me. Yeah.
Yeah. Your listeners can fact check that, but it was definitely post 2000. So I got my graduate degree in 99. Anyway, so I guess back to your question, there's a component in sustainability because we often focus on the environmental aspect, which is important, but there's, also a social aspect and an economic aspect. And so that personal ethic and then this kind of my interest in economics kind of pulled me into sustainability. And when I was, you mentioned the Sustainable Manufacturing Initiative. I'm trying to remember what year that was, but my boss at the time, so my boss was always a political appointing depending on who was in power. And so this was during George Bush's, probably his first term. My boss was a retired rear admiral from the Navy, and he was actually Reagan's naval attaché from way back in the day.
Wow.
And so it may be not an obvious suspect for like sustainability, but what was really interesting about this guy, because he was in charge of like carrier groups and stuff like that. They had to make and remanufacture essentially everything on board for months on end, and they had to survive, essentially with the food they had on board. And they had to ensure a clean environment and recycle, it was pretty advanced stuff, for like the late 90s and whatnot, in terms of thinking of like supply chains and sustainability of supply chains. Cause obviously it's a logistics issue for them, but it was a national security issue. Anyway, he bought on right away. He was like, yeah, this makes perfect sense. Cause what we were looking at was, how do you make supply chains in the U.S. for companies, are making cars and, whatever they're making? How do you make those supply chains more sustainable? So they use less energy, they produce less waste, but also so that those supply chains are a little bit more flexible and resilient if there's shocks, right? So kind of out of this thinking, we came up with this idea of the Sustainable Manufacturing Initiative. And it was really focused more on kind of the small and medium-sized manufacturers that live in like Walmart supply chain. Like, you've never heard of these companies, but they make, parts for everything that end up in products that we buy. And so they're very critical types of manufacturers for our economy. They employ a lot of people. Most of them are kind of like family owned and, medium-sized, like under a couple hundred employees. And so we developed a program that was really targeted toward them. Because a lot of the big manufacturers in Walmart at the time, and even the Department of Defense, was beginning to require things around energy reduction in the supply chain and waste reduction, which is also crazy to think that, we had Republican presidents that were developing, sustainability initiatives for government.
Yeah.
And George Bush issued the first green directive for the federal government, which, is kind of hard to believe that we've kind of lost that, bipartisanship on this issue, because it's just such a common sense issue. But anyway, so it was, kind of unlikely, partnering with an unlikely ally to develop something that at least our manufacturers in the country really ended up liking. EPA became a partner of ours, as did a couple of other government agencies. And basically, the best part about that job was I would get to travel around, meet different manufacturers in different parts of the country, highlight what they were doing, like with a press or a media event. We had some grants and other types of programs available for media manufacturers to be more sustainable, and it was great. I got to go to Seattle and see the Boeing Dreamliner facility, which was pretty amazing, to really small forges in Ohio. And, it was cool. It was a really cool way to see kind of like the foundation of, the American economy like that.
Yeah. And I hope we're shifting more and more to this sort of idea that sustainability is an everybody issue, not just a one-sided issue. So I hope we're moving back to that. But you also won a service award for that initiative, which was that like the first like federal award that you've ever won?
I got a couple. I think that was the last one. Certainly, again, I mean, that was kind of the the issue that really set me on my path for the second half of my career. Mm-hmm. So, I don't really look back at like awards and stuff like that, or even really accomplishments. I tend to kind of keep forward focused, but that experience and also understanding, again, like you said, that, sustainability is an everybody issue. That just, I think, really kind of ignited, my focus and what I wanted to do moving forward. And I wanted sustainability to be basically at the center, of what I was doing for my career, and not kind of this nice initiative that I happened to start. So, so it was good in that regard, because it was sort of a validation of work that I had done up to that point.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really cool. If you I think it's really awesome. And, but so after that, I'm sure that helped you propel to become the sustainability director for the city of Milwaukee, which I believe this is right. You were the first one, right? Like it was created, that role was new.
Actually, I was the second person. Okay. Yeah. I don't know exactly when that was created. It was probably around 2005 or 6, somewhere in there. And I think she was from the West Coast somewhere, but anyway, she did the job. She got the office set up, did a great job, kind of laid, some of the groundwork for some of the things that I would do. And then I think she went back had family or whatever back on the West Coast. But anyway, it was like a national sort of job posting. And so around this time, so my wife and I, so we had a couple things going on. We started to have a family. We wanted to get back to the Midwest. I wanted to be more involved in sustainability. And I was kind of getting tired of working at like the federal level, because it's very, just sort of kind of far away from the impact of your work. And so I wanted to kind of work more at a city level. I ended up just going out and targeting sustainability jobs for different cities. And I think it was sort of a strange mix. It was like Austin, Boulder, and Milwaukee. And I ended up choosing Milwaukee, and extremely happy that I did. Yeah,
because it's one of those things, once again, when we were talking about sustainability before, it's like, even if it did start in like the early 2000s, I feel like that's so late. I feel like all this sustainability stuff is, if someone would be like, hey, when did these jobs start coming up? I would say, oh, maybe the 1980s or something, like not the early 2000s.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly, the thinking around this stuff obviously goes back, certainly into the late 60s and the 70s. But even today, in terms of, the concept around sustainability, there's still a lot of companies and a lot of cities that don't have, a sustainability department or, a team in the corporation or whatever. So, we're still on like the maturity curve on sustainability, which is hard to believe.
Yeah. So could you talk a little bit about what you did as a sustainability director? Because I think people would just generally be interested too in like what a sustainability director does for a city, and like the programs and initiatives that you helped push for Milwaukee to make it more sustainable.
Yeah. So, I think the first thing is to, and this is sort of like being a native Milwaukeean, the first thing you notice about Milwaukeeans is there's there's not an acknowledgement of, how cool the city is, or, it's kind of a weird thing. So one of the interesting things about Milwaukee is it was one of the first movers around sustainability at the municipal level. The reason it probably doesn't get a lot of national attention or press on that is because we focused and when I came on board, really focused on what I call sort of nuts and bolts issues. Mm-hmm. Like, how do we ensure that energy efficiency, which is probably not the most sexy like sustainability issue, but really important when you live in Wisconsin. How do we make sure energy efficiency works for our businesses, for our manufacturers, and for our residents? How do we ensure that we've got the most comprehensive recycling program that we can have? How do we ensure looking at sort of like our vacant lots and things like that in the city, that we put those back into productive use? And we started piloting things around stormwater management and urban agriculture and stuff like that. So we took a very, again, sort of nuts and bolts approach, and you had some like flashier cities, focusing on one issue, and ended up getting more recognition for that. But so the mayor, and again, this is probably sometime back in 2005, 2006, Mayor Barrett created a green team of like community members, kind of sketch out, what should the city be doing on sustainability. And so that's when they hired that first director, and they came out with like, I would call it a to-do list of of different things. And it was a good start, but it wasn't a strategic document. And so I'm going to answer your question too, by the way.
No, this is fine. This is really interesting to me. So
it was more of a, like I said, to-do list. And it wasn't really a strategy based on the issues that really impact us in our daily lives. Mm-hmm. And so when I came on board, the mayor gave me the green light to go out and essentially develop an actual sustainability plan for the city. So I came on board in 2010, probably went to work sometime around 2011 or 2012, again, establishing another sort of quote unquote green team of stakeholders to inform this planning process.
Sure.
And so what we did was, so they had a couple of components to it. Like one component is city government. And so the city of Milwaukee owns hundreds and hundreds of buildings, thousands of cars. So it has a fleet to manage. It has a portfolio of buildings to manage. It has a pretty massive energy bill. It's probably over $20 million now a year, somewhere in there if you pull in like the waterworks department. And so, fuel purchasing, there's waste to manage. It's like a city within a city.
Right.
So it had its own kind of sustainability drivers that we needed to focus on. And sort of the primary one was energy, again, because we as a city had a really big energy bill, but also, again, because that everybody here obviously is, the cost of energy goes up, over the winter. And so it's important to help bring costs down and help obviously lower emissions and stuff like that. So the one component was city government operations. And then the other component was community sustainability issues. And so we really kind of let the community drive, what we were focused on. And so a lot of it was overlapping and sort of shared challenges and opportunities that we saw around sustainability as city government and the community. And so we aligned around water. We aligned around energy, what we call, transportation. So ensuring that we had, different options for transportation, not just a car, so that's really where the bike share started. We funded the first bike share program in the city, or the first station, access to food and outdoor healthy food, and then access to outdoor spaces. Those are kind of the issues that we focused on in the sustainability plan. And so then, from my perspective as like the sustainability officer for the city, then it's working with my colleagues in city government to get a handle on our energy use, for instance, and then working with the right stakeholders, whether it's a nonprofit or it's a developer or whoever it is, working and trying to find support and funding to support local initiatives around those same issues. And so as a city, we became really good and are now known for, internationally on water and primarily on stormwater management and water quality related issues. Obviously, we've got with Lake Michigan and the Great Lakes, we have 20% of the world's freshwater reserves, like in our backyard. So like water availability isn't necessarily an issue, but I'm sure you've heard about the lead issue and there's contaminants that, run off properties and get into our tributaries to the lake. And then that adds pollutants, to the lake and to our tributaries. So water just sort of became this fundamental issue that a lot of people were rallying around. And a parallel track, I meant, the Water Council, probably around 2007, 2008, 2009, they were just starting up. And so I did some consulting with them in terms of them being a key stakeholder as we developed this sustainability plan and really got to know their work. But the city, the Menominee Valley redevelopment, which the city has won a number of national awards for, has I think it's like a 60-acre stormwater park that naturally cleans and conveys stormwater in the valley, so by Miller Park and where all those new manufacturing facilities are, conveys that water. It's gravity fed down into the Menominee River. And it's a huge amenity for the people that work down there because it's like a park, but it also has, provides this ecosystem service. And the companies, support through a kind of like a tax in that district down there, support the maintenance of the park. That became a model nationally for doing redevelopments, especially where stormwater management is a big issue.
Yeah.
Reed Street Yards, which is where the Water Council is now located. That was like an abandoned rail yard, back in 2011 or whenever it was. And now it's been turned into essentially I would call like a water technology park. So there's something called Purple Pipe which is a water reuse system. So any building that builds there can plug into this water reuse system. And then there's a lot of work done down there with green infrastructure to ensure that, the runoff's not getting into the canal there. So the city became known for what it was doing around water management, green infrastructure, things of that nature. And in partnership with the Metropolitan Sewerage District, just did a lot of really great things that cities like, quite frankly, Chicago, Philadelphia, and others more or less look to us as models for. So I spent a lot of time on energy for the city, managing the energy portfolio of the city and promoting energy efficiency, just promoting solar. And I was the project lead on the wind turbine down at the port. That's for people who live in Milwaukee, there's a wind turbine down there that powers the port administration building. It was the city's first net zero energy building. Kind of externally spent a lot of time on water issues and urban agriculture as well.
Yeah. I used to live by that wind turbine. I always wondered, because there was like one, I'm like, I wonder what that's powering, It's that building there. So, and in fact, it's because of the agreement between, or at least when I was there, the agreement between the city and We Energies, we were selling excess energy back to the grid. So saving energy, saving money, and maybe even someday generating, revenue for the city, which is crazy that people are so opposed to renewable energy. It's like, Anyway, it's crazy, but because I was going to ask you, you're talking about like runoff and things like that, and into like Michigan and the tributaries and things like that. And because I grew up obviously in Milwaukee, so there was always that folklore around like how bad the water was in like Michigan, and like don't open your mouth or anything in the water because like you're gonna get sick. Is that like a reality, or was that a reality at the time and now it's getting better and better, or what's the situation there?
Back in the day, like the late 1800s, early 1900s, before we had a modern sewage infrastructure in Milwaukee or anywhere, right? You were just dumping everything into rivers. And so in most of the US, or at least at that point in time, in kind of like the industrial kind of Midwest and Great Lakes, that fueled a lot of disease outbreaks. And because the water, so Milwaukee was dumping its waste in the Milwaukee River, and it was going out into the Lake Michigan. And then we had the intake pipes for the drinking water, where the outfall was from, and, where all this raw sewage and stuff is. So that really spurred, and this happened nationally and internationally, the first kind of wave of, public infrastructure and sewage systems. And the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District, this is back in the 1920s, when they built the Jones Island facility, they, reused all the waste essentially and turned it into Milorganite, which they still do to this day, which is an organic fertilizer, which you can buy in Home Depot.
Wow.
Yeah. And so they started doing that back in the 1920s, the first utility in the U.S. And obviously still continue to do that to this day. So there's a whole wave of things got cleaned up considerably, certainly not to modern standards. And then you kind of had some backsliding in the 60s and 70s, and you had the Clean Water Act that was passed. And then again, a real considerable increase in quality again, driven by that bit of legislation. In Milwaukee, kind of the issue was the city had almost literally turned their back to like the rivers. And so like, this is before the river walk. And so if you look at old photos of like, the Milwaukee River or whatever, the buildings, it's just a straight shot down into the river. There's no balconies back there. There's certainly no river walk. And it was just sort of like, you just turn, it's just something that we used as a dump, for like 100 years, even though it had been cleaned up pretty significantly. And then, long about the late 90s, I guess. So the story goes, with Norquist, previous mayor, kind of this idea, well, let's reorient, the city back to these water resources. Cause kind of going back to my first little anecdote about, the historic industries in Milwaukee being all water-based, they kind of forgotten that and taken that for granted. And so, so you kind of had this reorientation back, to the water and this idea around the river walk. And suddenly people were coming, down to the Milwaukee River and down to the lakefront that, there wasn't access there before because it was very industrial scale and it's not, wasn't necessarily the most aesthetic place, for pedestrians to walk. And that just generated more interest in cleaning up the resource. And so, and so you had a partnership with the city and the Metropolitan Sewage District, and just seemed like something that people in general were into. And so spent a lot of time, cleaning up the river. Now, that being said, I mean, you don't overcome, 150 years of, industrialization and industrial pollution and legacy pollutants. You don't overcome that almost even in a generation. I mean, we seriously degraded, the natural resources in the state. It wasn't just Milwaukee. I mean, Fox Valley, Green Bay, and with all the paper and pulp mills and all the, kind of discharge coming from that and, going into rivers. So, I mean, this is a common problem in the state and nationally and certainly in the Great Lakes because of how industrial, we were.
Sure.
So we've come a really long way. There was a cryptosporidium outbreak in the 90s in our drinking water, which ended up killing people in Milwaukee. And so that really spurred the waterworks, the drinking water utility, to go above and beyond in terms of how they were cleaning and treating water. And it also, at the same time, the sewerage district was looking for innovative ways to keep pollutants out of the river and out of Lake Michigan. So just like me personally, like to this day, I still do some fishing in the Milwaukee and the Menominee, especially like when the salmon and steelhead trout make their runs in the spring and the fall. Take my kids down, to, the Bradford Beach, and swim in the lake. The water quality is certainly a lot better than it was. But I mean, there's just stuff like in Lake Michigan, mercury and PCBs and whatnot that have been dumped in that lake, since the late 1600s and early 1700s. I mean, if you have a drop of water that falls into Superior, kind of into the intake into Superior, and then it naturally flows all the way down through the upper and lower Great Lakes and then out the St. Lawrence River, it takes that drop of water like almost 300 or so years.
Wow.
Yeah. And so we've had pollutants circulating, in the Great Lakes that entire time. So it's gotten a lot better. Milwaukee, the rivers have greatly improved. The KK, the Kinnick is probably the last river that really needs some serious focus. The Metropolitan Sewage District has been renaturalizing the upper reaches of the Menominee River so that steelhead and trout can, go further upstream and spawn. I mean, it's a really great story. And it's ironic because when I moved here, one of the things that I knew about Milwaukee then was what the city was doing on water and kind of this emergent water council and what the sewerage district had built the deep tunnel. And I was like, I was driving to work one day. It was probably like maybe one of my first weeks on the job. And I was just like, trying to find a station to listen to and got into some talk radio by accident. And it was Charlie Sykes, I think. And he was giving out the Deep Tunnel Awards. And I was like, oh, the Deep Tunnel Awards. Cause it's like, that's like the most innovative, one of the most innovative infrastructure projects in the US. I mean, it's like very well nationally known. And it was like not a positive Deep Tunnel Award. It was like for graft. And it was like, and I was so confused. I was like, but the deep tunnel, I mean, it really is. It's held up nationally and internationally as a massive success story because before the tunnel was built, there were combined sewer overflows from Milwaukee into the lake, 70 times a year. So raw sewage just flowing into the lake about 70 times a year. And now the average is 1 to 2. And you compare that to Chicago to this day, Chicago still sends untreated wastewater down the sanitary and shipping canal into the Mississippi Basin.
Wow.
You look at Seattle and Vancouver, they're still sending untreated wastewater directly into the ocean. So Milwaukee is really top notch when it comes to water quality. And it's got this weird sort of local or regional reputation that, they're problematic. I'm sure we were all problematic, when we were developing, but I mean, Milwaukee is really no joke. I mean, people know Milwaukee internationally on water issues.
Yeah. It's sort of the thing back to what you said before. It's like when you grow up there, there's not an acknowledgement of how like cool or well your city is doing. It's just sort of taken for granted.
Right. Yeah.
I also want to talk about, because you're a committee member for the 2028 Olympics, which, how cool is that though? Like, that's really awesome.
It certainly sounds really cool when you say it.
I think it sounds cool no matter what.
No, it is cool. This is a short conversation because we really haven't done a whole lot of work in the past couple of years. So they formed the committee. It used to be the 2024 committee.
Okay.
And so LA and Paris were putting together an application in competition with each other, the host of the 2024 Summer Olympics. And so LA formed what they called I think they called a legacy committee, but essentially it was a sustainability committee. And so they asked me to be on that. And the goal behind this committee is that part of LA's bid and then their commitment now for the 2028 Olympics, which is what they ended up being awarded. But their commitment is to essentially try and reuse buildings. So, one of the big economic drags, on cities and whatever that do the Olympics is they got to build all these new facilities.
Right.
So reuse, right, that's a big part of sustainability. So how can we reuse and repurpose buildings and facilities that are already there? So that's kind of one thing. And then the second thing was around water, because water scarcity and water challenges are huge in Southern California. Obviously, you're going to have an influx of people there. It's going to be in the summer. It's going to be hot. So what are some best practices and things that the committee and then the organizers actually put into place in terms of water management? So that's kind of how I got pulled into that. And so we were pretty busy back when the bid, was being developed, and I can't even remember. It was probably a couple of years ago. So we're kind of on hiatus right now. We're sort of hanging out and waiting for them to call us back into action when the planning starts again.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's true, because you even see internationally around the world when the Olympics leave, it's like there's like an Olympic ghost town, basically, of like facilities that never will be used again.
Yeah, it's a shame too, because you look at like Rio, for instance. I mean, it's not necessarily, Brazil's not the wealthiest country, and they spend a lot of tax dollars and whatnot, people's money to build these things out. And Rio, there's a lot of just abandoned stuff all over the city, and so it's a bit of a shame, actually. And so I think it was a really cool idea for LA to really take that approach.
Yeah, and so I want to talk about the Water Council too a little bit. With the Water Council and sort of, you talked about stewardship and things like that. What are your goals there? I know you can't speak for the entire organization, but like specifically in your department and what you're doing for the future, like where are you guys looking to go? What do you want to do with the Water Council moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, we have like 3 strategic priorities, and one of those is stewardship. I already talked a little bit earlier about technology as kind of, one of the driving forces behind the creation of the Water Council. I was brought on specifically to address this stewardship issue. So how do you work with large water user factories and large farms to reduce, the amount of water that they're using, but also to kind of reduce their impact on the watershed, from like pollutants and stuff like that, getting from the factory or running off the farm. So sustainability is entirely my focus, and the way that we've built out our stewardship, or I should say stewardship is my focus. The way we built out our stewardship program at the Water Council is through a partnership with an international nonprofit called the Alliance for Water Stewardship. So they're based in the UK. They're global in nature, and they have basically it's called a standard. It's like LEED, for buildings, or USDA organic, or standards that tell you how you have an organic product, or if it's LEED standard for a building, how you build an energy efficient building. They have a standard for how factories and farms manage water. And so basically we at the Water Council work with the Alliance on promoting this standard in North America. And so I do a lot of work from everything from large corporations. We've done work with Miller Coors, for instance. We're finishing up some work with Apple this year, all the way down to very small companies and farms. Did a couple really small, worked with a couple small manufacturers here in the Inner Harbor, Elementis and Ingle Tool and Forge. Basically, so work with these companies to promote this stewardship ethic so that they ensure that number one, they're compliant, with regulations, and number two, that they're beyond compliance, that they're doing innovative things around, controlling water quality and, and being, conserving water resources and whatnot. So it's a focus on businesses, which is kind of goes back to what I was doing in the government, which I really like, working with businesses and different types of businesses. We worked with a farm here in Wisconsin. We're working, I mentioned Apple, and it's just a range of different types of businesses. And I do Canada, the US, and Mexico. So kind of all over the place, just, getting out there and seeing what some of the water challenges are. And we've got a lot of water challenges in North America, and a lot of these businesses, and certainly food and beverage companies, are kind of on the front lines because they source from farms, and a lot of our farms are under stress economically and as well in terms of water resources. So for me at the Water Council, that's my focus. It's almost 100% on stewardship and promoting what we call corporate water stewardship.
No, I mean, that's great. And I guess my final question is, with all of this and like working in the government and working with, like, as you said, government officials, elected officials throughout your career, I mean, not right now, obviously, but do you ever consider running for like a public office or like actually going into like an elected official seat in the future anytime? Or is that something you're not interested in at all?
No, not at all.
You've seen too much. You've been too close to it.
Yeah. In all honesty, yeah, I spent, I think it was close to a year up on the Hill, in the U.S. House of Representatives in D.C. on a committee as a staff economist. And I had a conversation with, it was the general counsel at that time. And I'm not going to say who it is or which party it was. Yeah. Frankly, it doesn't matter. Yeah. And so they were promoting some economic type of legislation. And so I was doing my job, which was to analyze it and say, these are the pros of doing this and these are the cons. And,
sure.
And so I delivered that to the general counsel, who took it to the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. And they did not like my analysis. And I got called in, and kind of dressed down, by these two people about, this doesn't tell the story that we want to tell, and blah, 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 blah. I said, but these are the facts. And
this is the story, though. So
yeah, I said these are the facts, and I'm kind of out on a limb a little bit here. Some little economist guy, and I got this most powerful committee in the House. This guy's yelling at me, and he told me we don't care about the facts, and he's like, just make this say what I want it to say, and I walked out of there. I remember I was married to my wife at the time. I called her up and said, I think I'm done.
I'm over this.
I think I want to go back to the Commerce Department. And so I did. I left. And that was it for me. I will say I've worked with some politicians that are really smart, really dedicated. I mean, for me, Tom Barrett, who's the mayor of Milwaukee, has got to be like one of the greatest human beings and, people that I've had, a politician I've had pleasure of working with. But politicians like him are few and far between. Most of them have, they've done something shady to get to where they're at. And, they got other things in their mind, like getting reelected or raising money or whatever. Right. And there's very few sort of like what I would call like servant leaders in politics these days. A lot of it's just self-dealing and, how do I make money off this venture, after I leave. So
exactly.
Yeah. So I'm not too, I'm happy doing what I'm doing right now because it's just fun. Every day is a little bit different, and I enjoy, having at least some sort of a positive impact, through what we're doing at the Water Council. So.
Yeah, I would love to have Mayor Barrett on the podcast someday if he ever listens, or it's easy to get to him. I haven't tried yet, but no, I think what you're saying there, I think that's why a lot of people got so disillusioned with politics is because of like this similar story that you've had, not working with them, but just like hearing about that sort of stuff and be like, oh, great. So these are the people that are elected. No, but I appreciate everything that you do at the Water Council. Like, water is such a valuable resource, and I'm thankful there's people like you and organizations that are like pushing sustainability and stuff like that, because it's massively important. So thank you so much for coming on and doing all that you do.
I appreciate it. Yeah, thanks for kind of giving airtime, to these issues, and hopefully, people will look us up or look up the issues and get to know their water a little better. It's always a good thing. Don't take it for granted.
Yeah, and so speaking of that, where can people find more about like the Water Council, what you do, and things like that?
Yeah, so Water Council is pretty easy. It's thewatercouncil.com. So you can go check us out there. And the Alliance for Water Stewardship, which I mentioned, is the4ws.org. And you can check that group out too.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate your time and speaking with you.
Thanks, man. This was fun. I appreciate it too.